Did Jesus descend into hell? That's exactly what the Apostles' Creed says. Let me read it to you. He descended into hell. The third day he arose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven. So the Apostles' Creed is quite clear that Jesus descended into hell. Now, if you say to me, well, I don't believe he did, I could already tell you who you are. You're an evangelical, a Protestant evangelical. You're not Catholic. You're not Orthodox. You're not likely Anglican, none of those things. Because what happened is in the turn of the last century, there were some heretic hunters like Dave Hunt, Hank Hanegraaff, who began to attack the Word of Faith movement. And they thought the way to attack the Word of Faith movement is to go after the teaching of Jesus descending into hell, because we as Word of Faith, we kind of preach it a lot. And so since others weren't preaching it that much, they figured, let's go after that, as if they're the ones that introduced this heresy to the church. But the idea of Jesus descending into hell is not something that the Word of Faith ministers introduce. It's part of the historic teaching of Christianity. Ever since the 4th century, this creed has been something that Christians have pronounced and proclaimed before their baptism. So think about it. Since the 4th century, Christians have declared Jesus descended into hell, and then they went to get baptized. So notice the Christians have been affirming this belief. So what happened is, because of these heretic hunters, they scared many evangelicals from believing in the Apostles' Creed and actually believing that Jesus descended to hell. But that is part of historic Christian teaching. Now, really, it stands to reason that he went to hell because Jesus died for our sins. And isn't it true that sinners, after their death, they go to hell? So wouldn't it be natural, if Jesus is dying for our sins, that he would also have to go to the place of punishment like sinners would go to? And he did. Now, to believe Jesus descended to hell doesn't mean you believe he was in hell for all 3 days. There's nothing in the creed that says that. I don't believe he was in hell for all 3 days. But there was a period he did suffer for our sins. But then also hell was a place that he triumphed over the devil as well. Now, there are some Christians who say, all right, I believe he descended to hell, but only to triumph over Satan. All right, well, at least you believe he descended to hell. But I believe he went to hell for 2 reasons: to both suffer and also to triumph over Satan. Now, one of the arguments that have been given recently about Jesus didn't descend into hell, they'll argue that the Greek word Hades that is used comes from the Hebrew Sheol. And they'll say, well, in the Hebrew, Sheol is a place of both the righteous and the unrighteous. And that's true. Sheol is in Hebrew a place for both the righteous and unrighteous. However, the Greek word for Hades doesn't have that same meaning as Sheol. Just because it's sometimes translated from Sheol to Hades doesn't mean that Hades in Greek is equal to Sheol in Hebrew. It is not. For example, in the Spanish language, we use the word Jesus es Señor, which means Jesus is Lord. But in Spanish, Señor can also mean just human beings that we affirm, like a sir. We might say Señor in Spanish, and just means sir. But we would never refer to Jesus as sir. We would refer to him as Lord. So in English, Lord has a stronger meaning than the Spanish of Señor. The same is in true with the Greek. Hades has an exclusive meaning, which means the abode of the damnable dead. Jesus mentioned it. He talks about the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And he says, and let me give you a quote from this passage in Luke 16, verse 22. The time came when the beggar died and the angel carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died in hell, where he was in torment. The Greek word is Hades. In hell, where he was in torment. See, so in Greek, Hades was the place of hell. It was a place of torment. That's the New Testament Greek. And the Apostles' Creed was written in Greek, and the word is Hades, and it was always understood as the place of the damnable dead, not the place of paradise. Even the Apostle Paul, in his declaration of one of the early creeds of the church, he says in Ephesians 4, verse 7, but to each of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he led captives in his train and gave gifts to men. What does he ascended mean, except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. Now, Paul, who understood the Hebrew concept of Sheol, you know what he says? He descended into the lower earthly regions, not region. Some people will say that when Jesus died, he only descended to paradise. But Paul says he descended to regions. That means he went to both regions, the place of the damnable dead and the place of the righteous. So Jesus went to both places. He went to paradise right upon his death. He told the thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. But he also, when the Passover set, his soul descended to hell where he was in suffering. This whole concept of Jesus descending to hell is important. It comes from Peter's very first sermon on the day of Pentecost. Listen to what Peter says in Acts 2:24. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep his hold on him. Notice, Peter says agony of death. If Jesus was just in paradise and no suffering, there's no agony in death. But Peter says he was freed from the agony of death. Verse 27 of Acts 2, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Notice the word is Hades, hell. In other words, God did not leave Christ's soul in hell. So if he did not leave it in hell, that means it was in hell because he took him out. Do you see this? So even in the first sermon of the Christian church, Jesus' descent into hell is proclaimed. So the idea that Jesus went to both paradise and the damnable dead is biblical. Don't let Hank Hanegraaff and don't let these heretic hunters like Dave Hunt persuade you that this is somehow a heresy. Really, what the big heresy that I'm concerned about is the denial of hell by many Christians. You're hearing that a lot, that hell doesn't really exist. But when we affirm that Jesus went to hell, don't we also affirm that the sinners go to hell if they reject Christ? To me, the real risk is people denying the existence of hell. So in answer to the question, did Jesus descend into hell? Yes, he did. Did he go to paradise too? Absolutely. He went to both. And did he suffer in hell? Yes. Did he also triumph over in hell? Yes, he triumphed as well. So Jesus descended to hell, and let us affirm that in the Apostles' Creed.